Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Healthspan Academy. I'm your host, Craig Shearhart, and joining me today is Marjan Mogharrabi, who is a certified holistic nutrition expert. And she's worked with clients based all over the world, helping them manage their blood sugar. And she wrote a book called The Blood Sugar Management Guide. So we're going to talk to her about her practice and some practical tips on how to manage your blood sugar and improve your overall function. Marjan, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is nice.
Cool. Yeah, it's good to see you again. So I want to start with a little snapshot of a day in the life. Nutrition's kind of an odd, I want to say odd, but it's specific person to person. And there's like infinite ways of coaching it. There's infinite ways of absorbing it. There's so many different theories behind it. So I want to get a snapshot of what your coaching program looks like, the type of questions you ask in the onboarding, how you decide if it's a good fit. What does it look like? What does that experience look like as a client when they start to potentially work with you?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that I'll start that with just kind of explaining what holistic nutrition even is. I think a lot of people aren't familiar with it because we hear a lot about nutrition coaching or working with a dietitian, for example. But holistic nutrition is really just kind of a way of looking at the body as a whole. And what that means is that we are recognizing that we're not just a physical being. There are other factors involved in our health. There's an emotional side. There is mental health. There is even a spiritual side if you choose to look at it that way. And so we're not just looking at the physical, but we're looking at various symptoms that pop up. And I'll explain this a little bit more as we go deeper into conversations. Cool. But we're looking at various symptoms that pop up and why those symptoms might be presenting themselves as a way that the body is communicating to us. Right. And we want to look at, first off, why is that happening? But also, again, going back to the fact that we're not just physical beings, it could be a multitude of different things. And that's why, like you said yourself, nutrition is not really something that can be like, okay, well, everyone should be eating apples and
here's the single solution that's going to work for everyone.
Exactly.
In the entire world.
Exactly. Imagine it was that easy and that would be so great. But we do really want to look at things from an individual basis. And one of the ways we do that in the world of holistic nutrition is through something called symptomatology. So what we're doing is we're actually looking at the collection of symptoms that present themselves from various aspects, physical, emotional, mental aspects that present themselves, and looking deeper to find the root cause of why that might be happening. Right. And that's actually what led me into the world of blood sugar balance.
Cool.
So what happened with that was that I always kind of experienced different symptoms that were, I don't know, just random. We would call them random. And I would go to the doctor and get blood tests taken for things like mood imbalances, like mood swings, or just feeling anxious out of nowhere, just mental health related types of issues. And so I would experience these frequently. And for every time that I went to go get blood tests or get checked out for various different things that it could be, nobody ever thought to look at blood sugar. And one of the reasons for that is that when we think about blood sugar, I can maybe even ask you this question. What's kind of like the first thing that comes to mind?
Well, sugar intake, nutrition, your caloric load, your activity level, that kind of stuff.
Obviously, you come from a health background. Yeah. If I ask an average person on the street, typically they say, "Oh, I don't have diabetes, so I don't need to worry about my blood sugar intake, or I don't need to worry about sugar intake because I don't have diabetes," right? And so that's typically what people think. Or a lot of other factors include weight gain, or like sometimes people think that it only happens to people who are elderly. And so again, for all the times that I would go and get checked out, nothing would ever point to blood sugar imbalance because I have a pretty slender figure and I wasn't in an older age category, and nobody ever really thought to connect the dots. But as I started to study holistic nutrition, and again, holistic meaning that we're looking at things from a wider perspective, when I started to look at beyond just the blood work and look at these collection of symptoms, what they were all really pointing to is the ups and downs of our blood sugar levels, which happen all day. So if you have eaten food in the last hour, your blood sugar managing system is working right now. So it's
for sure
really false to think that, oh, this is only something that people who are diabetic need to worry about. Oh, this is something that people who are experiencing a weight gain, for example, need to worry about. It's not necessarily like that.
Right. That's I like that you kind of brought that up, because that's like when I first kind of found myself in the longevity kind of field and studying this stuff. It's like there was people taking metformin and like these drugs for diabetes to try to get to the polar opposite end of the spectrum. And like some of the clinicians you talk to, like the thing they fear most is diabetes. So it's like they're trying to get to the very opposite end of diabetes. That's like kind of the pinnacle of like the poorest health, I guess, when you think of like blood sugar and function and like longevity. You're just literally shortening your age. So I think it's like doing the opposite is going to open things up for better function.
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool. So you talk a little bit about like it's multifactorial. So, and this can be tough to manage sometimes, like, especially when it's like mental health, it's not tangible. So like, what kind of practical advice do you have for people to figure out what those symptoms are, and then sort of how to start navigating whether it is a blood sugar issue when you first start having those conversations?
Yeah. So I'm, I guess, kind of famous in my practice for drawing diagrams and drawing the blood sugar curve, as we can maybe picture it from science class. Actually, I'll say that I wish that we learned more about this kind of stuff in science class in high school, because I think this is the practical information that we could all use in our everyday. I think one of the biggest issues that we have is that we often jump from diet to diet thinking that, this next diet is going to be the one that's going to help fix all of my issues, without actually being educated on what nutrition is actually doing inside of our bodies. We don't know why do we need protein, for example? Why do we need fat? Like, what is it actually doing inside of our bodies? And we don't learn those things. The reason why I bring that up is to answer your question, actually, is that we don't often hear enough that there are things that we can do to balance out our blood sugar. I think oftentimes we think, oh, well, and, if we get to the point of diabetes, then, oh, well, too bad, so sad. Like you have diabetes now. Yeah, exactly. There's nothing more you can do.
The cards on the belt, I guess. There's nothing.
Exactly. And I think far too often we think that about our health and about longevity in general, and it's just not true. And I just really want to shout it from the rooftops that there is definitely something that we can do about it to both prevent, and also if we are at a point where we are either pre-diabetic or have been diagnosed with diabetes, there are tons of ways to manage it. And I'm not just talking about cutting sugar. There are actually nutrients that you can add to balance it for the long term. But one of the things that I work with clients on, like I mentioned in the beginning, is basically mental health types of symptoms or issues that might come up, such as anxiety, depression, low mood. Energy levels is a big one as well, too. Sudden drops in energy levels. And so the reason why I mentioned the blood sugar graph, so if you can kind of picture it, what happens is we eat a meal, and most of that meal gets broken down into sugar or into glucose. Not every aspect of it, but most of it does break down into glucose. Even like the vegetables and the fruits that we're eating, it'll eventually break down into sugar, and that is entering our bloodstream. And from there, it's entering our cells. Why do we want it to enter our cells? Because we want it to give us energy. The reason why we
gotta fuel those mitochondria somehow.
Exactly, right? Yeah. The reason why we eat food is because we want to have more energy to do the things we want to do. And so typically when a client first comes to me, one of their biggest things, the symptoms that they're experiencing is low energy levels or sudden drops in energy. And so the question I always get is, how do I know what diet is good for me? Is this diet good for me, or is that diet good for me? And I say, if the food that you're eating is not giving you energy, that's already the biggest indication that the food that you're eating is not right for you.
Right.
So that's one of the biggest factors that helps me to determine whether somebody's blood sugar might be up and down. Again, going back to this whole concept of symptomatology, I don't do any blood work in my practice because that's just not what a holistic nutritionist does. However, they can come to me with blood work if they do have it. But typically I'm looking for these symptoms. I'm looking for low energy levels, anxiety that kind of tends to come out of nowhere, headaches, migraines that come about because of that dip in blood sugar. So when I talk to clients about these symptoms coming up and I draw the curve, typically that's the aha moment of, oh yeah, every time I experience these symptoms, it's always oddly enough when that curve is coming down. And I say, exactly. That's why we need to start looking at blood sugar beyond just the physical, which is the blood work, which is important, beyond the weight gain, which is important as well too. But we need to look at it from a wider scope of there are other factors that our bodies are literally screaming at us saying, hey, we need a little bit more support. And this is where I come to the part where I can talk about how we can support that system.
Awesome. Yeah. It's a tricky thing because there's you have all, like you kind of alluded to, you've got all these systems that we can use to fix it, and they can all kind of play a role in the symptoms. And we haven't even gotten to sleep and all that stuff. It's all those factors. You talked about, so the obvious thing is sugar intake. If the sugar gets too high, obviously that's going to impact our blood sugar levels. What are some of the kind of under the radar? You talk about micronutrients and stuff that we can be deficient in. What are the things what would be tops on your list to sort of check for deficiencies in if we are feeling some of those symptoms related to blood sugar issues?
Yeah. So one of the biggest deficiencies that I see in my practice is actually a macronutrient that is extremely widely available in North America, and that is protein. And it's odd to say that a lot of us are deficient in protein, because you can probably just off the top of your head name 10 different protein sources right now. But unfortunately, either because the nutrition world has either gone up and down with giving it a bad rap sometimes, or maybe meat products or eggs get a bad rap. I don't really know where this information is coming from. But first off, those are not the only protein sources in this world. There are plant-based sources as well too.
Right.
But we're also not talking about a large amount of these nutrients either. We're talking about the size of, for example, the palm of your hand is about, the classic example,
classic chicken dosage.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is not a lot, right? Like a chicken breast this size. Again, if you're choosing to eat animal-based proteins, is not a lot of protein. And that's 20 grams, which if you look at blood sugar-based research, typically that's the amount that you want to aim for per meal throughout the day to really keep that curve on a nice curve.
Right.
What we want to try to avoid is the spike and the crash. Yeah. And the reason why protein is so important in that is because pure protein actually doesn't break down into sugar. And so a lot of people don't realize this. I think, again, going back to our education on nutrition, is we just never really learned what we all only ever learned, eat healthy and then you're going to be healthy. What's eat healthy though? What does that mean? So what does a protein actually do? And so protein doesn't break down into glucose molecules. I mean, a piece of chicken anyways. Plant-based protein does also, a component of it does break down into carbohydrates. However, a piece of chicken, a piece of steak, they break down into something called amino acids. So they don't break down into sugar. So first off, when you look at a plate and you're consuming a little bit of protein as well as a little bit of carbohydrates, because we still do need that sugar to get into the bloodstream to give us that energy, and the fibers and all the other components, if the protein is not breaking down into sugar, it's not contributing to that curve. And if it's not contributing to that blood sugar curve, it's not creating that spike. So it's not contributing right? So it's kind of like almost thinking about it as like a way to displace the amount of sugar. So what I always say to clients is, first and foremost, make sure that protein is there on the plate. So if you're picturing your plate or a bowl or a smoothie or whatever you're having, whatever you're choosing to eat as a meal, the protein should be that first thing there to kind of like crowd out the rest of the stuff. Then you want to build your plate from there with the other nutrients.
Right.
Another nutrient that I see that is often lacking is fats. Fat also does not break down into sugar. So that's another reason why we want to add that into our plates. Pure fat, like a tablespoon of olive oil, does not break down into sugar. So something that I often hear when it comes to diabetes management or blood sugar management in general is, well, if I'm not going to be eating sugar, what the heck am I going to be eating? Everything breaks down into sugar, right? Like that's the biggest challenge with this nutrition stuff is that, okay, I can cut all of these things that are bad for me, but what am I adding to my plate? Like, what am I going to eat? Right?
Yeah. So we're so conditioned to want breads and like pastas, and so it's just like, I guess it was just Western culture, just like the staple in the dish. But I feel like even in my own experience, like people have this perception around protein where it's just for bodybuilders and they're just building muscle. But like you said, the amino acids there's a lot of them are essential, right? So
100%. Yeah.
But we need them for like enzymatic like reactions and like the whole metabolic system. It doesn't function.
500 different things that we need protein for. And it's really, when you look at it from a blood sugar perspective, it's really the thing that is creating energy in the body. So when our blood sugar is spiking up and crashing back down, you've probably experienced this once or twice in your life, because I know I have. And not just after Halloween, just, how it is, life in general. And so when we're experiencing that blood sugar crash, it's often because we've had way too many carbohydrates and we often feel super sluggish and exhausted and we kind of want to take a nap, right? And so when we add in the protein sources, I literally see this in my practice. I see clients work with me one session, the next day, adding more protein, all of a sudden they feel like they've had like 4 cups of coffee and they're just ready to go. So it really is not just for people who are working out often. It is for everyone. Everyone needs minimum that 20 grams of protein. Again, from multiple sources. It doesn't have to be from chicken or beef. It can be from a whole bunch of other sources. And we really need that 20 grams to keep that leveled, that energy level.
Yeah. And it is challenging. So, I mean, the vegan diet's picking up steam, I think, from a lot of different perspectives. One is like the environmental impact and so animal cruelty and the whole meat industry. There's issues with that. Yeah. So there's legitimate reasons. I think like we could argue whether it's a healthier option. I think that's up for debate, but if there's ethical reasons, definitely we could see people and sort of appreciate why they would move towards vegan. When you are working with clients that are plant-based, what are some of the challenges you kind of walk them through when you're talking about protein sources?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is, again, just in general, a lot of us just don't consider protein unless we are working out consistently. I think that it's unfortunately been so married to gym culture that oftentimes the average person who's coming into my practice who has blood sugar imbalance, who is dealing with the mood swings related to blood sugar, drops in energy levels, oftentimes, even if they are eating animal sources of protein, they're just not eating enough of it. So that's one of the things that I see with plant-based clients as well too, is that it's not that there isn't enough availability. I mentioned this at the beginning too, is that there are tons of sources out there. There are beans, there are chickpeas, there are like a million other things. But when we don't readily think about it as the thing that is providing the energy for that system and the thing that is really balancing our blood sugar levels, then it's just kind of like goes by the wayside. When we think about it, like a bag of potato chips is vegan. So it's like, okay, so when we don't have the education.
Why am I not losing weight? I've been doing vegan for months.
I don't know why.
What's happening?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what happened here. Yeah. So that's often that's what happens when we don't have the educational background for that. And I think that as much as like I harp on the fact that the education system didn't teach us all of these things, now is really our opportunity to do that. So when I say to clients or when I'm talking on my social media platforms, I'm really encouraging people to really take notice of these symptoms. These symptoms that pop up that are low energy, anxiety for no random reason, and having a migraine like 4 or 5 times a week is what some people experience. When you see these things come up, don't think of it as, oh, it's just normal. You know, I'm aging. It's the way it goes. It really is not as normal as we think. And we want to start leaning into those symptoms, finding out why the body is presenting those. 9 times out of 10, it is a blood sugar imbalance of sorts. Don't mean to bring it back to blood sugar again, but it really does come back to leveling out that blood sugar. And now is our time to really invest in our health from a different perspective. So I really, really want to encourage people to start looking at their health from a different perspective. We can say all we want, right? Like, oh, we didn't learn about this stuff in school. So like, oh, what are we supposed to do? Let's wait for the next diet fad to come out. Next, it's going to be not high fats. It's going to be high something else. And let's just jump on that and see if that works. Or we can actually start leaning into these symptoms that are coming up. And the symptoms that come up are all individual, right? So that's how you know what diet is meant for you, because your symptoms are literally telling you what you need. If you're experiencing low energy, typically because you're not consuming enough protein sources.
Yeah, that's tricky too. I mean, because anytime there's a change, there's an adaptation of the body, right? So, and I think like just even in my own coaching experiences, it's like tricky because you don't want to take them too drastically different from what they're doing, or they'll start to get those lulls, even if they're doing the right things, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of can be off-putting. So that's kind of one of the things I love about coaching is that your role is more or less putting that person in the driver's seat. And like you said, not just throwing their arms up like, oh, well, I guess my doctor couldn't fix it. This is my life, the rest of my life.
Exactly.
You know, and we're so like, especially because we have free healthcare in Canada, it's like you see your doctor and they're just literally here's a prescription to get rid of the symptoms. Whereas a coach, you can get to the root issue and walk them through that. So I like that analogy. And I like that answer is like you're sort of helping them help themselves more or less. That's kind of your
definitely.
Your role,
I think that's one of the biggest things about my 8-week program. I work with clients one-on-one over the course of 8 weeks, typically. And what we really do is help them to listen to these symptoms in their bodies. We don't often hear, or we didn't learn that like these symptoms all mean something. They can be frustrating for sure. And I've been there, trust me, where I just don't know where to go with all of these symptoms. They seem so random. And why is now this happening? Oh, must be part of the aging process again. But really, when we start leaning into it, we see that we can actually do something about it, like you said. But also, I think that it really helps to empower the individual to really just kind of figure things out for themselves so that they can be their own best coach. Because really, after 8 weeks, honestly, there is not like a whole lot I can do besides helping them to really listen to their bodies so that when after the 8 weeks, let's say 6 months down the road, a year down the road, all of a sudden they're feeling symptoms of low energy. Oh, I wonder why I'm feeling low energy. Go back to the education aspect. Oh, maybe I'm not incorporating enough proteins throughout my day. Okay, I'm going to go back to. So I find that when I'm working with clients, the biggest empowering piece is really the education aspect of it, as really getting to know your body. So it's not so much me saying, okay, on Monday, you're going to eat this. And on Tuesday, you're going to eat this. It's more so, okay, what symptoms are coming up? And what can we do about those symptoms so that in the future, when you experience these again, our bodies are ever changing, our hormones are going to go up and down. And when you experience these things in the future, hopefully you'll think, oh yeah, okay, maybe this nutrient is missing, or maybe I need to incorporate more of this into my system.
Right. Yeah, I love that. So as you were speaking, it kind of got me thinking into the ancestral model. And I think like, because I feel like we're outdated, right? It's kind of this weird paradox where like the stuff that gives us energy, we're in excess of, and it kills our energy, right? We get like in the wild, we were craving strawberries and raspberries and those natural sugar sources just to get by. And now like they're in such excess that it's like, it's just doing the opposite, and it's throwing us through this, and our insulin levels are way off, and we are getting diabetes like an epidemic. So from that perspective, do you try to look at things from more of an ancestral perspective? Is that part of your education process through people, is like, you know, less processed is better? Let's kind of follow what worked kind of when we weren't outdated, I guess, based on like where we're at kind of in society today.
Yeah, I think that, again, going back to that education piece, it really helps empower the client when you learn about how these systems work. And like you said, when you refer back to our ancestral history, so something that I'll often say to clients is that our digestive systems, we're just not so used to actually paying attention to our digestion and how it works. And that's a big component of holistic nutrition in general, because we really want the nutrients to digest so that they turn into tiny, tiny little particles so that they actually get into the cells. Right. So before even talking about blood sugar, when I'm working with a client, I'm typically talking to them about their digestion. How do we optimize that system so that it breaks down better, so that it actually gets into our cells better, so that it gives us better longevity and more energy? And so one of the factors of that is that over the course of several years, what we've gravitated more towards is high carbohydrate diets. Our palates have just kind of like become very craving based towards pastas and carbs and rice and those types of things, which there's nothing wrong with those things, because we do need a little bit of glucose getting into our system.
Sure.
However, we've gone, we've gone, like you said, way too far the other way. And so what I often recommend to clients is starting their day with something sour tasting or something bitter tasting. And the reason for that is, you even picture yourself biting into a lemon. Don't actually do it, because your dentist will be very mad at both of us. Not really good for your enamel. So I squeeze some into my water and drink it out of a straw. But the reason why you want to kind of have something bitter tasting or sour tasting is because it gets saliva going. It gets more stomach acid going. And that creates more of a domino effect for our digestion to really work optimally, which again is what we want. And so a lot of times clients will say, well, how come like my grandparents never did stuff like that? They didn't drink lemon water or take like a shot of apple cider vinegar, which is like the trend these days to do.
They also probably smoked and ate.
They also
probably all getting cancer and heart disease in their 70s. So, well, maybe we don't follow what they did.
Exactly. Let's just brush past that really quick. But they also, another factor, a healthier factor, is that these types of foods were more incorporated into their diets. Maybe not our grandparents, but maybe their grandparents more so, of like hundreds of years ago. They probably were eating a lot more sour tasting foods, fruits and vegetables. Like you said, they were eating berries probably, which is very low sugar. It doesn't really like spike anything. They were probably eating a lot more bitter tasting vegetables like kale and arugula, and those things really tend to kind of get the digestive system going. And so now, unfortunately, well, I shouldn't actually say unfortunately, I think now is our time to really start being mindful of those things. We can turn things around. The body actually is so amazing and so miraculous, and it will respond to these little tiny changes. So just kind of being a little bit more mindful of maybe adding in some more sour tasting things really does kind of like get our digestive system going, but it also helps to curb our cravings over time. I don't know if you've ever experienced that before, but when you typically have something sour tasting or bitter tasting, if you wait a little bit, you often are not craving anything sweet or carbohydrate based. Yeah. And the reason for that is that it kind of like helps to alkalize the gut as well too. Right. So it has lots of benefits.
Nice. Yeah. Lemon water is a staple in my life. I'm pretty much obsessed. Yeah. Me too. mostly carbonate. I'm just addicted to soda water, and lemon's usually my go-to in there.
Nice. I like it.
I totally feel it. Yeah. And on that note, I want to circle back to your own habits. And I think one of the things that is sometimes challenging as a coach is like managing your own habits, especially when you've got these different people you're leading in different directions. And it's kind of it's easy to get lost, right? With your own habits, with not only nutrition, but like your fitness habits, your health habits, your mental health habits, your sleep schedule, your productivity, your family balance, all that stuff. So, yeah, and especially in a pandemic, it's kind of easy to get your priorities all over the place. So what are your top priorities on that list, and what do your habits look like around those priorities?
Okay, you just made me feel really guilty about myself because it more so has to do, I would say, with entrepreneur life. I work for myself. I work from home. I have always, actually, even before the pandemic, I worked from home. So I didn't have much of a pivot there. However, I am trying to lean more into my own fitness and health habits. I think that the biggest thing for me is that I need to focus on starting my day with something that is blood sugar balancing, just to bring this all back to blood sugar. But the reason for that is that when you look at the curve of how blood sugar works, and this always triggers me when I am talking to a client and I'm drawing the curve and I say, it starts with the first meal that you're having in the day, and then the sugar goes in, and then I'm thinking to myself like, oh my God, I haven't even had my first meal yet. Or like my first meal was like a coffee, basically, which is, I do not recommend you start your day with a coffee, because you look at that curve, it's really that beginning part of it that determines the rest of the curve. So when our first meal is like just a bagel and a coffee, what's happening is that it's spiking that sugar. Right. It's crashing down, and then it's creating sugar cravings because our crash happened. And so typically we crave something sweet after. And so then we're going to go through Tim Hortons drive-through probably again, grab another coffee to get our energy levels back up. And it really starts that cycle all day. And so what I am trying to do for myself, and what I recommend to clients, is that first meal of the day, whenever that is, doesn't have to be right at 8 a.m., but whatever the first meal of the day is, you want to make sure it's balanced with your proteins, at least 20 grams of protein to keep that energy level stable. Have a fat source, avocados, or like some sort of oil drizzled on, whatever, or eggs have fat in them as well too.
More people need to discover avocado. It is delicious.
I know. And it just makes everything so creamy, and it just helps to keep us full for longer. It's so good. Yeah. And just like having that carbohydrate or fiber base from like fruits or vegetables, whatever you choose, but starting that off on a good note, on a good blood sugar balancing note, I find really sets the tone for the rest of my day. Because when I have stable energy levels, then I'm feeling more motivated to do a workout, either from home or to go to a gym. Because otherwise, then I'm like feeling that crash. And you know how that crash is. Does anyone feel like actually working out during that crash? Yeah. No, you feel okay, I'm going to take a nap and then I'll see what happens. Trust me, I've done the whole, I'll take a nap and then see what happens. Trust me, the workout doesn't happen after. So
we'll start back tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's always, we'll start Monday.
Yeah. And then it's the same conversation tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't want to push myself in the sense of like, I like have to make it to the gym every day. I want to actually feel inspired to move my body or to work out every day. And one of the ways for me to do that is to start my day off on a blood sugar note, good blood sugar balancing note, so that the energy levels are there, so that I'm like, I need to get rid of this energy somehow. So I'm going to do a workout. Right. So there's a difference between dragging your butt to the gym and actually feeling inspired to go to the gym when you're nourishing your body in the right way.
For sure. Yeah. Awesome. Well, those are solid tips. And some of those I could probably I'd take advantage of it, applying.
Yeah. We all can. I admitted to my own faults as well too.
Yeah. But it's one of those things, right? It's especially like me, I'm kind of a mad scientist with this stuff. And before I prescribe something, I want to test it out. So whether it's like keto or cyclical keto or like paleo or intermittent fasting or extended fasting. But it's easy to get lost, right? And
Totally.
and then to figure out the stuff that really meshes well with you, it's a totally different animal than whether it's going to fit with your clients. But yeah,
I think the most practical thing is to just listen to those symptoms, like we talked about, right? Is that nutrition can be a very confusing world, especially with somebody of your mindset. But going back to leaning into your own system, what's coming up for you? Are you experiencing low energy? There are nutrients that you need to add for that. Are you experiencing random mood swings? Are you experiencing whatever it is? You want to start paying attention to that. So that's probably the most practical tip I can give for nutrition.
Awesome. Sweet. Well, this has been so nice catching up, Marjan. It's great to see you. And we'll have to do this again sometime.
Yes, we should. Thank you so much.
I'll put a link with how people can reach you in the show notes for today.
Yes, please do.
For sure. Awesome. Well, thanks for tuning in today, guys, in Healthspan Academy, and we'll see you next time.